All right, so guys, bottom line is we had three opinions yesterday, and I'm gonna put you out your misery, because what happened is we read a Mishnah, as you remember, which Gavin well read for us. So I'm just sharing the screen to remind you. Is just the middle part. If one stole a pregnant cow that gave birth, or a wool-laden ewe and he sheared it, he pays the value of a cow that stands to give birth, or the value of an ewe that stands to be shorn at the time of the robbery, as you know. So we found a similar brisa that gave the opinions on how the Tanaim deal with these particular issues. And we firstly have the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said the thief returns the animals, in addition returns the shearings and the offspring. So in other words, according to Rabbi Meir, that the robber never profits from any of his endeavors on appreciation. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is the common opinion at which Rashi and the Rosh hold. They're slightly different, but Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is the same. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying the stolen animal returns to the owner as is. And what we are saying is there basically that the stolen animal is returned to the original owner in the present shorn or non-pregnant state. So according to Rashi, that if the animal is still intact, there's not a significant enough physical change that you can't return the animal. The only thing is you pay the shortfall of the non-pregnant animal compared to when it was pregnant at that stage of pregnancy, which is still not the full value of a calf. And in terms of the shorn wool, the wool might have appreciated because it grew longer within the jurisdiction of the robber, which could have been 2 months later. So you only pay the value of the wool at the given time of the robbery, which could be a little bit less, and return the original ewe. As far as the Rosh is concerned, this is a significant change. Rashi said it's not. It's all that's changed is like the equivalent of somebody getting a haircut, or alternatively, the fetus becomes a calf, but the actual ewe doesn't change, neither does the cow itself. So therefore, that actual animal can be returned, because the physical change did not occur on an animal significant enough for Rashi, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and the balance is paid. According to the Rosh, when the animal is pregnant and you deliver a non-pregnant animal, it's too significant a change. So therefore, you keep the animal, and all that you would pay is the cash of the animal in that stage of pregnancy, but the appreciation still does belong to the robber in terms of the calf. And in terms of the wool, the Rosh says that the ewe had a significant change. It's not just like a haircut. So the robber pays the original owner the cash equivalent of what the ewe was worth at the time of the robbery, and gets to keep the ewe and the longer hair growth. So both cases agree with Rabbi Yehuda that the appreciation is kept by the robber. But in terms of whether the physical change is significant enough in the animal is where the Rosh and Rashi disagree. Now, we've got the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who says that at the end of the day, we view it as if it was an article appraised and placed with him according to its cash value at the time of the robbery. So what we are saying there, and we already can see how it differs from Rabbi Yehuda. It sounds the same, but Rabbi Yehuda allows the robber to benefit from the appreciation factor, whereas Rabbi Shimon is saying, well, no, we actually look at it at that point in time. And what that means is that it's seen almost like the iron sheep assets that a woman brings into a marriage. So what happens is they assess at that common market value at that timeline, and whether the property appreciates or depreciates, you give the cash value at what the original owner lost at the timeline at which it was stolen, which means it doesn't take into account appreciation or depreciation. So we can see how the three opinions differ. Now the question comes on Rabbi Meir, according to the Gemara, because they said, well, let's examine what Rabbi Meir's reason is for ruling that the rabbi must return the calf and the shorn wool. It could be, there's a couple of propositions by the Gemara. It says, look, maybe because Rabbi Meir holds that a stolen article that undergoes a change remains in its place. What do you mean a change that remains in its place? It means that a change doesn't affect acquisition. Well, certainly not in this case, because according to Rashi, it doesn't seem significant enough where the animal did change to that capacity. But maybe he holds in general that a change remains in its place, meaning that any physical change does not now render the property that of the robber, and the robber pays the cash equivalent. So why did we say, guys, that such a thing was mentioned? Why is that enactment mentioned, guys, about a physical change belonging to the robber?
Belonging to the robber, that he's allowed to own it. He's allowed to
claim it. It's the cash equivalent, yes.
Does it have any correlation to when he returns the animal in the state it was stolen in? Is any link there?
No. Generally, the link is that certainly from there's the biblical acknowledgement that physical change renders an acquisition for the robber and he pays the equivalent. But there's also rabbinical, which means teshuva can take place. So if he's changed the article like unplaned wood and he made furniture, he's not going to want to undo all his hard work and return the article he spent so much time on. What he would like to do is say, listen, if I stole some planks of wood and I made something nice, I'm prepared to pay Builder's Warehouse for the planks of wood that I stole. But I don't want to return all this hard physical work. And that allows him to make a teshuva. So the rabbi's enactment portion of that was to allow him to make an easier teshuva, should his conscience prick him in any manner. There is still a biblical commandment. So the question goes as follows. The Gemara inquires, what is the reason that Rabbi Meir rules that a robber must return the calf and the shorn wool? Is it because he holds that a stolen article that undergoes a change remains in its place? In other words, that a change in fact does not affect acquisition. Or perhaps generally he holds that change does affect acquisition, but here it is a penalty he imposes. So what do we mean a penalty imposes? Is that he agrees that according to biblical law, the robber acquires the calf and the shorn wool. But the reason he imposes a penalty on the robber and requires him to return those articles, and as you know, the shearings and the calf and everything else, is he doesn't want the robber to be benefiting in any way from his robbery. And that's for two perspectives. The one is that why should the robber benefit in any way from an appreciation? Why? He's committed a crime. And second thing of it is it might encourage a robber to do so. Do you get what I'm saying? I'll give you an example. A person has no money. A person knows that this animal is about to give birth. He knows that if he returns it and gives the cash sum, but he waits till it gives birth, he's made money on a way that he couldn't have made without the actual cow. Do you get what I'm saying? If he just keeps it for enough period of time. It's almost like you're stealing dollars from somebody and you get the appreciation of the rand crashing in the meantime, and eventually you give him back what the rand was worth at the time the dollar was worth. So who lost out in that appreciation value? The original owner of the dollars. Because now he didn't benefit from the rand crashing and the incremental improvements that his dollars had against the rand. Issue quite close to home at the moment. So, yeah. So as long as you guys understand where we're coming from here. In other words, guys, there can only be two possibilities with Rabbi Meir. Either he holds that a physical change doesn't affect acquisition for a thief, or he holds that in fact it does biblically, but rabbinically he's not prepared to sanction it. And he's saying whatever the thief profited, he has to return it. Either in the original animal, by returning the original animal and every bit of its byproducts, as a penalty, or he's saying that a change does not affect acquisition, and it's not a penalty, and that's why the animal is returned, because the fact that the animal was pregnant and now it's not, or there was wool in the animal now it's not, is not significant enough of a change. Or does that all make sense, guys? So the Gemara says, well, okay, so what's the practical difference between those two possibilities? Because whatever position he's holding in, either way, Rabbi Meir is saying that the Rabbi has to return everything. So what's the practical difference? The Gemara says it's where a physical change occurred to the animal and it deteriorated due to malnutrition or whatever the case may be. So in that case, if Rabbi Meir holds that a physical change doesn't affect acquisition, then even if the animal depreciated on account of the change, the robber can return the animal in its present state and say to the owner, behold, what is yours is before you. But if Rabbi Meir holds that a change does affect acquisition, and it's only by force of a special penalty that the robber must return the calf and the shorn wool, that's in the case of appreciation. But then Rabbi Meir would apply the rule that when the animal actually depreciated it, then at the end of the day, the robber acquires this depreciated animal and has to pay the full value to the owner at the time of the robbery. Because why does the original owner have to spend so much money fattening the animal up? Do you get what I'm saying? But that's only if he holds that there's a penalty for appreciation. But he wouldn't apply that same penalty for deterioration because he doesn't, again, want it to work for the thief. He wants in either way for the thief to be accountable, hence the special penalty. So he would fluctuate when that penalty is applied to the thief according to what's most suitable for the original owner. But if he holds that a change does affect acquisition, if he holds that a change does not affect acquisition, then whether the animal appreciated or not, you've got a problem when it comes down to deterioration, because the robber in that case benefits and returns as is. Whereas if he returns as is in appreciation, well, the robber hasn't gained in the appreciation factor because he's returning the calf, the cow, or the shearings and the ewe. So the appreciation the robber hasn't benefited from, but the depreciation the robber has, if he holds that a change does not affect acquisition. Whereas if it's a rabbinical penalty, it works against the robber either way. Does it make sense to you guys?
Yeah, it's the same if
Gab, I've lost you a sec.
If a robber steals your Porsche and if it's all smashed up, then the robber has to repair it, type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
You can't hear me.
I can hear you now. Okay. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. So I said that if a guy steals your Porsche, right, and he returns it in perfect condition, right, that might be it. You might just leave it. You might just let it go as long as he brings it back in perfect condition. But if he brings it back all smashed up, then you're going to expect him to repair it. It's kind of like the depreciation on the. Exactly. It has to be restored back to the value or to the condition that the Porsche was in or the animal was in when he actually started. I think it's quite a good example.
Yeah, it is a good example. So that works, Gavin. That really, really works what you said. So you're getting a good sense. But there is a question that comes as a result, because we still don't know what Rabbi Meir's reasoning it is. We know the effect now, the practical difference between the two possibilities. But what we want to know, according to the Mishnah and comparing it to the Brisa, is what is his actual reason. Is it because he holds that a physical change does not affect acquisition, or does he hold a special penalty in a case of deliberate theft? So we're learning a resolution from a Mishnah that's going to come up later in 96b, and it says as follows: if one stole an animal and it aged, or slaves and they aged, he pays their value as of the time of robbery. Meaning that, let's say, let's use a modern example. Let's not say you stole a slave, because when people age and you return it after months, you won't see a depreciated stage. You won't see that costing depreciation. So let's take you kidnap a supermodel, and the guy owns the supermodel for whatever reason. It's a female supermodel. He owns it, and he's made a lot of money off her for gigs and stuff like that. That he's had his way with her, and he's kept her for like 10 years. Now, all of a sudden, from being a young 20 supermodel, she's a middle-aged model. Now, she ain't going to be running on the fashion lines of Paris anymore. So therefore, that age has created depreciation. Am I making sense, guys? And therefore, that's when the problem comes. So what we're saying is here is that if the Mishnah says, or you steal a slave for 10 years and the slave in his 50s, for example, is able to do a lot of manual labor, but in his late 60s, when they finally figure out the theft or whatever, the guy can hardly move a leaf. Then there's depreciation of what that slave is worth in terms of what productivity of manual labor he can do. Okay, and it's the same with an animal. An animal, in fact, has got a shorter lifespan, so the animal might peak with strength at a certain age, and then after that be great when it lands up in the butchery, but little else in terms of the workhorse. So what we are saying is, if one stole an animal and it aged, or slaves and they aged, he pays their value as at the time of the robbery, okay? Because aging is an irreversible detrimental process. Now, the reason why I'm using this example of an irreversible detrimental change is one of you could have said sometimes with a deteriorated animal, as opposed to an aged animal, is that you just feed the animal and it goes back to its state pre-malnutrition where it's strong again. That's a reversible change. And there are other opinions that say a reversible change isn't seen as a permanent physical change, and therefore doesn't affect acquisition according to certain opinions. But aging is an irreversible detrimental damage. Why? Because it will never get back to its optimum in terms of working ability, whether it's a working farm animal or a slave that's used for manual labor. So when the robber acquires the stolen animal or slaves, he compensates the original owner by paying him the value at the time of the robbery. So I'm going to ask you, who's losing out so far? Guys?
Now, the robber's losing out.
No, not the robber. The original owner's losing out. Because we are saying... I'll tell you.
Okay, probably what didn't you... Okay, go ahead.
No problem. Let me just repeat that statement. Because of the breaks in the Zoom call...
I think repeat the statement. I think
the statement says, if one stole an animal and it aged, or slaves and it aged, he pays their value as at the time of the robbery. Now, the person that loses there is the original owner, because he's now lost a productivity of somebody in the prime of their productivity level, and now their strength has fatigued. It's not like today with intellectual property. That slave was used for manual labor, and that animal was used as a working horse. And now when it's lost its optimum strength, the original owner loses, okay, if it's at that time. So that's the general opinion. Rabbi Meir says, with respect to slaves, the robber may say to the original owner, behold, what is yours is before you. Now we're going to see that Rabbi Meir holds differently with slaves and an animal, and I'll tell you why. What we learned that slaves are compared to real property. What's real property? Land. And land can't technically be stolen. You can steal a title deed, but you can't physically walk off with land, okay? Because it always remains in the physical domain of the owner. So if somebody runs away with your title deed, but you own the land, he can't physically take the land from you. Does that make sense? So even if a robber occupies it and it undergoes a physical change to the land, say he works on the land, etc., or he deteriorates the land, either way, when he gives it back to the original owner, it's as if he didn't do anything, because a land can't be legally stolen, you can't move it. And since the slave is compared to land or real property, it can't legally be stolen because it always is. And therefore, if it undergoes a physical change such as aging, the robber doesn't technically acquire him. So the slave is regarded as having aged and depreciate while in the owner's legal possession, and the robber need only return the slave as to the original owner, according to Rashi. So whether or not it's fair or not, that's the category that certain rabbinic opinions see a slave as real property, in which case there is no theft. You've just got to return it as is. There's no such thing as a change of possession. And in other cases, it's a case of seeing as immovable. And those opinions are saying, well, then would you have to compensate the owner for the slave's aging process? So either way, this is the point when we get to Rabbi Meir with respect to animals. So with respect to slaves, there's a special rule, but the Rabbi Meir disputes the Tana Kamma's ruling only with respect to slaves. In other words, he's saying, look, slaves is a different category because that can never truly be owned by the robber. Just like a robber can't possess land, it doesn't move anywhere. So with respect, and what is that implying? That with respect to a stolen animal that aged, however, he agrees with the Tana Kamma, which is what you call general rabbinic consensus or anonymous opinion, that the robber acquires it and pays the value at the time of the robbery. Okay. So if the robber acquires it and pays it at the time of the value of the robbery, then then you should know that technically it means a change doesn't affect acquisition. Why? Arthur, you still awake? Arthur? Okay. So what we are saying is as follows. As the Gemara says, if it should enter your mind that Rabbi Meir holds that a change remains in its place, that even in the case of an animal as well, the robber should be able to return the animal in its present depreciated state and say, behold what is yours before you. Rather, do you not learn from this that Rabbi Meir holds that a change does affect acquisition? Okay? And the proof of it is that's in the case where the animal, he can't simply return it to the original owner and say, it's just like a slave. What is yours is before you. He has to actually pay a penalty on the aging process. Whereas the Tana Kamma turns around in the Mishnah and says, no, change does not affect acquisition. Do you get what I'm saying? So guys, I'm testing you. What is this proving? What are they trying to prove that Rabbi Meir's opinion is? Arthur, what are they trying to prove? I'm unmuting you. Arthur, you want to unmute yourself to answer?
Yes.
What?
Okay, so from what I got so far is... Okay, hold on a second. So just rephrase the question again, because I know the answer, so I think in my head here.
What is the government trying to prove with the fact that he disagrees with the Tana Kamma in terms of the animal? Because the Tana Kamma says, okay, both with slaves and with animals, at the end of the day, you can return it as is. And the aging process that causes permanent depreciation because value's been lost of the deterioration, is you can return it as is, and therefore the Tana Kamma's opinion seems to imply that with regards to slaves and animals, that you pay the value at the time of the robbery, which means if there was a physical change, What's a permanent physical change? Aging. It's a permanent deterioration. And therefore, according to the Bava Kamma, there's no, the robber doesn't acquire it and pay the cash equivalent of the slave and the animal. He just returns the slave or the animal, despite the fact that the aging process deteriorated both.
Okay, can I ask you one question? How come when somebody steals a cow, right, they got to pay 5 times, but when they've done this, they're not paying any of those penalties? Like, there's no actual punishment, extra punishment to the thief.
Okay, so there's a difference between the words. Okay, so I'm going to answer your question. It's distracting the actual question at hand, but I'll answer it. It's actually completely distracting. It's out of context, but I'll answer.
Okay. What I'm trying to say, Damon, what I'm trying to say is, how come the person pays there? But in this case, are they trying to prove that the person? I think they're trying to prove the person should pay penalties for the aging as well. Because
they're not saying that. But to address your previous question, it's using the example of the robber, not the thief. You're right, Arthur. If one generally steals and not robs is at gunpoint. Thievery is done surreptitiously without the original owner's knowledge. So for theft, one pays double. If you're just stealing like a laptop or a cell phone or a car, if it's a sheep, it's times 4. If it's a cow, it's times 5. If it's anything else that is stolen, it's times 2. The reason why you're not paying duplicate penalties, to answer your question, is this is a case of a robber, not a thief. He takes out a gun and it says, "I'd like to take this article from you." And the robber only has to return what he stole. Okay. So that's a separate question. The point we're trying to say now is we want to try and establish what Rabbi Meir's rationale is previously. In other words, when he says that the robber that takes from the original owner the cow and the calf and the ewe and its shearings, he's got to return everything. Okay? So he's saying that there's only 2 possibilities of why I could say that. Possibility 1, he wants to penalize the robber to have no benefit of appreciation and not make a profit from this illegal transaction. But, so that's one option. And then in the case, if the animal deteriorated, if that's his reason, then if the animal deteriorated, the thief would have to keep the deteriorated animal and then obviously recompensate the original owner the cash, because that is a penalty, okay, that's imposed. The other option is that Rabbi Meir holds that a change does not effect acquisition for the robber, and the robber never gets to keep anything from a physical change. What physical change? Well, the physical change is it was a pregnant cow, and now it's a non-pregnant animal with a calf. And in the case of an ewe, it's a shaved ewe with separate wool that grew further in the robber's possession. So in that particular case, the robber doesn't get to keep the shearings or the calf, according to Rashi, or the robber and and according to Rosh, the cow or the ewe, and pay the cash equivalent for the state at the time of pregnancy or that hair growth of the ewe. So in other words, the only other reason that Rabbi Meir can say that is if the physical change to the animal in the state of robbery to where the robber was now accused of it is not seen as significant enough to change ownership for the robber, where he has to pay the cash equivalent. He can return the animal as it is, which means that's the reason, and the shearings, etc., that's the reason that everything is returned according to Rabbi Meir, is that the robber never has acquisition of anything, because it's because there's no physical change. He doesn't say that what he's saying is, even if there is a physical change, it doesn't entitle the robber to keep the article or any of its byproducts. That's what he's saying. Does that make sense? So he has to return it as is. What's the practical implication? Is that if you steal an animal and basically make sure it's malnourished, you can return it in a shocking state. You say, listen, that physical deterioration of the animal, Rabbi Meir holds that no change affects acquisition, so it's not mine, you can have it back. So in the case of depreciation, the original owner loses. Okay? In the case of appreciation, the robber doesn't get the benefit, but in depreciation, the original owner loses. Whereas if it's a penalty imposed by Rabbi Meir, but he says in general, according to biblical law, that a physical change in the animal does affect acquisition, so that the pregnant cow is now not pregnant with the calf, and the ewe from being wool laden is now bare, and the wool is separate. He's saying in that particular case, it should actually belong to the robber, and the robber just returns the animal at the time of the robbery's value, whatever we see that value is, but he gets to keep the benefit of how the hair on the ewe or the wool on the ewe grew during his particular housing of the animal, or the fact that it became a calf from a fetus, and he gets to keep those additional proceeds. Okay, so we can either say that Rabbi Meir is intending that the thief never benefit, or that just he doesn't hold that a physical change affects acquisition. That's how this argument came up. And now we're saying we need proofs for it. So it's using a Mishnah to say, hang on, we see Rabbi Meir's opinion in many dafs after this with regards to his reaction to the Tana Kamma with regards to slaves and animals. Because the Tana Kamma says, if somebody robs another of their slave or animal, and that animal ages, which is a permanent deterioration, then all you have to do, the Tana Kamma says, is return the animal or the slave in the position that it's in, and that change does not affect acquisition, that physical deterioration change, and therefore the original owner must accept it. But Rabbi Meir making an argument and a distinction on the slave and saying, look, I understand, Tana Kamma, what you're saying in terms of the slave, because a slave is like seen as land, not movables, and therefore you can never steal it, just like you can never physically remove or steal land. So I understand in your case there. But he never said he agrees with the Tana Kamma in terms of the animal, which implies that the physical deterioration of the animal now means that the robber has to keep that deteriorated animal and give back the value in cash of what the animal was worth before it aged and before it deteriorated. And therefore, that's trying to prove that Rabbi Meir is saying that he actually holds personally that a change does affect acquisition. Do you get what I'm saying? This is what it's trying to prove. Because we don't... Yeah?
So then he's going for the penalty then?
No, he's not going for the penalty. Because again, in the beginning, I'm going to explain it again. In the beginning, we don't know if he's doing it as a penalty so that the thief doesn't profit. He's not going for a penalty. It's saying that the reason is that the physical animal changed and deteriorated. So therefore, it belongs to the robber at the point where it made a physical change, and the robber has to reinstate the value at the time of the robbery. I see how you see it as a penalty, but it's a different penalty to the case where it's a rabbinically imposed penalty by Rabbi Meir, where basically, if there was an appreciation, the robber couldn't benefit either. In this particular case, it's just because the change affects acquisition and the animal happened to lose value that the robber loses. But had the animal appreciated, but that change affect acquisition, that physical change, the robber would have lost out. So it's not a penalty based. It's about the physical change affecting acquisition for Rabbi Meir. Sometimes the robber gains, sometimes he loses. But Gavin, if it is a penalty-based thing, then Rabbi Meir is going to make sure that when the animal appreciates, the robber has to give back all the appreciation, lock, stock, and barrel. But if the animal depreciates, he keeps the animal, the robber, and he pays and reinstitutes the higher value which was made at the time of the robbery. You get what I'm saying?
Mm.
Can you see the
Okay.
nuance difference?
Yeah.
Okay. It's quite complicated. I haven't even begun to get to the complications yet, but I'm doing one little step at a time for you guys. Okay. So it's saying, how long have we got? We've got about a minute left. So it's saying, and if it should enter your mind to say that Rabbi Meir holds that a change remains in its place, then even in the case of an animal as well, the robber should be able to return the animal in its present depreciated state and say, behold, what is yours is before you. Rather, do you not learn from this that Rabbi Meir holds that a change does effect acquisition? And his ruling here that the robber must return the offspring and the shorn wool is simply a penalty that Rabbi Meir imposes when the changed article as appreciated. So it's saying if he holds that a change does effect acquisition, it means that there's a penalty when there's an appreciation. Do you get what I'm saying? But if he holds it's just because a change affects acquisition, then unfortunately the original owner loses out if the animal loses weight. Do you get the subtleties of it? Or guys, not
Yeah.
really. If you guys don't, because you're gonna have to give it back to me tomorrow.
No,
Tomorrow.
that's fine. That's
You mean
fine.
what's a Shabbos?
Well,
Kevin's